The theater had fallen into a reverent silence long before the lights dimmed. Every seat was filled, every camera already recording, yet no one truly understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The screens backstage displayed only a simple title card, "The Final Duet." The audience had arrived expecting a performance, perhaps even a remarkable one, but they did not expect history to stand before them, breathing, living, singing one last time. What they were about to witness was not just a song, it was the echo of a century, the trembling voice of humanity itself, carried by two souls who had survived what the world vowed never to forget. When the stage lights finally rose, illuminating the polished floor in a gentle gold glow, two very elderly figures were slowly escorted into view. The audience gasped, not out of shock, but out of respect so profound it felt like the room itself bowed. A man and a woman, both 97 years old, both survivors of Hiroshima, walked together with hands intertwined as though still supporting each other across the many decades of their intertwined lives. They moved with the fragility of glass yet carried the presence of giants. Their steps were small, but the silence around them deepened with each one, charged with the weight of history. The woman, slight in frame, wore a soft pastel kimono embroidered with faint cherry blossoms, blooms that symbolized both life's beauty and its brevity. Her silver hair was tied neatly, and the tremor in her fingers betrayed not fear but age, and perhaps a quiet anticipation. The man beside her, tall even at his advanced age, wore a simple dark suit. His hands bore scars that time had not erased, faint reminders of the day he never stopped remembering. Yet his eyes, clear, steady, profoundly human, held a warmth that seemed to soothe the entire auditorium. They took their place on two stools placed gently in the center of the stage. A single microphone stood between them, but neither reached for it. Instead, they faced the audience and offered a shared bow so slow and deep that it drew tears before a single note was sung. Some in the audience were already gripping tissues. Others pressed hands over their mouths. People instinctively felt that this performance would leave them altered. The music began not with instruments, but with a swelling wind sound that mimicked the breath of morning. A soft piano joined, playing the first delicate notes of the song they had sung together decades earlier, a song born in grief and hope. It was a song their city knew, a song their children and grandchildren had heard in whispers, a lullaby shaped from ashes yet carrying light. When the woman opened her mouth, the hall froze. Her voice, though thin with age, carried a clarity that cut directly into the heart. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It held purity, the kind forged only by a lifetime of loss and forgiveness. Her opening line trembled softly, almost like the first petal falling from a spring blossom. Yet within that trembling was strength, and within that strength, emotion so raw that the audience felt it like a gentle blow to the chest. The man joined her, his voice weathered and low, textured like paper worn by decades of folded memories. His tone resonated deeply, steadying her fragile melody with a grounded harmony that filled the room like a warm embrace. Together, their voices wove into a duet that was less performance and more prayer. It was as though they were singing the diary of their lives aloud for the world to hear, every loss, every survival, every moment they wished had been different, and every moment they cherished despite everything. As they sang, flashes of their shared past seemed almost visible in the air. He remembered standing as a young boy on a warm summer morning in 1945, hearing a sudden roar that did not sound like anything the world had ever created before. He remembered the blinding white light swallowing everything around him and waking in a ruined world where the sky had turned sickly. He remembered searching desperately for his mother, his sister, anyone, walking barefoot through streets that no longer existed. She remembered clutching her baby sister on that same morning, shielding her with her small body as the impossible flash consumed the sky. She remembered the unimaginable heat, the fractured sound of the earth itself crying out, and her own voice screaming until she could scream no more. They had survived. But survival, they learned, was not the end of the suffering, it was the beginning of carrying what could not be erased. Their duet moved into the next verse, a promise written long ago. Their hands reached for each other, fingertips brushing like two souls reconnecting. The audience felt the intimacy of that gesture, realizing this was not simply a performance, it was the last act of a lifetime shared in the shadow of memory. People in the audience began to cry openly. Some trembled as the emotions overwhelmed them. Others bowed their heads, as though witnessing something sacred. Judges seated at the front, experienced professionals who had heard thousands of performances, were stunned into silence. The youngest judge wiped tears repeatedly, unable to compose herself. The sternest judge, known for his criticism and high standards, leaned forward with his hand covering his mouth, not in skepticism but reverence. No one could speak. No one could even look away. The piano deepened, and the lighting subtly shifted, casting soft ripples of blue and gold across the stage. It created an effect similar to sunlight moving across water, a reminder that time flows, that life continues even when scarred. Their voices rose slightly in the bridge, blending with a yearning that transcended language. Though the lyrics were Japanese, the audience felt every meaning, every heartbeat behind each word. Their song spoke of childhood stolen, families lost, cities rebuilt, promises made to the next generation, and the hope that humanity would learn from what happened to them. It was a plea wrapped in melody, urging the world to remember, to care, to choose peace over destruction. Their voices carried the weight of that plea not as a lecture, but as the fragile truth only survivors can share. Halfway through the performance, the woman's voice quivered, not from age but from emotion threatening to overcome her. The man turned slightly, touching her shoulder with a gentle reassurance that seemed to say, "I'm here. We finish this together." She nodded, inhaled deeply, and the two resumed their harmony with newfound strength, unified by the invisible thread that had held them together for nearly a century. The screens behind them slowly illuminated with faint imagery, cherry blossoms falling, ripples in still water, the rising sun breaking through clouds. It was symbolic, elegant, and respectful, nothing sensational, only poignant reminders of the Japan they knew and the Japan they rebuilt. The visuals were crafted by artificial intelligence using their own descriptions and memories, turning technology into a vessel for their lived truth. It was as if the past and future were holding hands, just as they were. Their voices softened near the final chorus, singing almost like a lullaby to the world, a farewell, a hope, a blessing. The fragility of their tones, mixed with unwavering conviction, resonated through every corner of the auditorium. Their breaths were visible in the microphone's sensitivity, their slight tremors amplifying the authenticity of their performance. As they sang their final lines, the woman closed her eyes gently, letting the words drift from her lips like a final message written in the air. The man glanced slowly across the audience, his gaze heavy with wisdom yet peaceful, as though he was finally ready to set down the burden he had carried since childhood. The final note was held not with power but with tenderness. It was soft, delicate, disappearing into the silence like a lantern carried up into midnight sky. When it ended, the room did not erupt into applause. For several seconds, no one could move. It was as if the air itself refused to break the moment. Then, slowly, the first sobs escaped into the silence. Tears flowed freely. People covered their faces. Many bowed their heads, overwhelmed by the purity of what they had witnessed. The applause finally came, growing rapidly from gentle to thunderous, yet still somehow reverent. It was not applause for entertainers, it was applause for survivors, for witnesses of history, for two human beings who had turned unimaginable tragedy into immortal grace. The elderly woman and man stood with great effort. They bowed once more, deeply, as though offering the world their gratitude. But no one in the audience felt worthy of that bow. If anything, the audience felt they should have bowed to them. The camera zoomed in closely, catching the tears glistening on the woman's cheeks as she whispered something to the man. He nodded, squeezing her hand. They had practiced this duet many times in their youth, performed it during small memorials, shared it privately during quiet evenings. But today's performance was different. Today was the first time they sang it not for themselves, not for their families, but for the world, one final time, at the age of 97, standing side by side as they had when the world first broke around them. The host approached cautiously, unable to speak at first. He placed a hand over his heart, attempting to steady himself. When he finally found words, his voice cracked, betraying the tears he had tried to hold back. "Thank you, for sharing this with us. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your voice." The elderly man bowed once more, lifting the microphone slowly. He spoke softly, in English tinged with age. "We sing not because we are strong," he said, "but because we remember. And because we hope the world will remember too." The woman added, her voice fragile but beautifully clear, "This was our last duet. We give it to all of you. Please, choose peace." The audience stood as one, applauding not out of excitement but out of deep respect. Many were crying openly. Some embraced strangers beside them. Others simply stood in silence, absorbing the profound emotional gravity of what they had witnessed. Their families joined them on stage, embracing the two survivors with delicate care. Generations surrounded them, children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren, living proof that from devastation, life continues, grows, heals, and hopes. Cameras flashed, but gently, no one dared break the sanctity of the moment. As the stage lights dimmed again, the elderly pair were escorted backstage, walking slowly but proudly. Their steps were small, yet they carried the legacy of resilience, love, memory, and hope. They had lived nearly a century. They had seen humanity at its worst and at its best. And tonight, they had given the world a gift it could never repay. Backstage, staff members wiped tears from their own faces as they passed by. The elderly man and woman were seated gently in chairs, offered warm blankets, and surrounded by their families. A quiet calm settled over them. They exchanged a look, one of understanding, one of relief, one of completion. They had done it. They had sung their final duet. And the world had listened. Their voices, aged yet eternal, would linger long after the stage went dark. Their story would be passed on, their song preserved, their message carried forward. The world had not just witnessed a performance, it had witnessed a living moment of history, a moment that transcended generations, borders, and time. And no one who heard them sing that night would ever be the same again.